Sure.
Angela, can you know about your background or politics? When I'm man, yeah, did on 2019 man, Bitso man, I want to go to Mishiba.
Hey, Kushima, it's come over to Zungo. It's my real name, but it's Benito, born 1961. Alex, and then I started school here, and then I moved over to the countryside after divorce. This thing, how we were in English or what?
All right. You will work at the shop.
Okay. But okay, target group, our audience, target audience,
mixed. Nangabla, but Robbins.
Yeah, Mariana to do what not in a Mopasi bar. Tom Mara, we deleted you.
What's your parts of the pit? Benito, please tell me of your early days when you were still a youth in this township. When were you born? Who were your parents then, as well as probably your political background?
Yes, I was born in Alex in 1961. My parents divorced in the early 60s, and I then stayed with my mother. I started school in Alex, but immediately after my parents' divorce, I moved over to the countryside in Brits, Bapo, where I continued my education until I matriculated there. I then came back to Alex and lived for a few years in Tembisa, and then came back. I became involved in the struggle because my consciousness was raised by the events in 1976. Then I was in standard 6.
Okay.
And I was able to see what was happening, though I was then in the countryside. Every school holidays I would come back home in Alex, and then I got involved in that way.
Okay.
When I stayed in Tembisa, we formed a study group with a few friends, and we were reading Das Kapital, Marx literature, and then the consciousness grew. I then later came back to Alex, and when I came back to Alex, there was ECHO. I then joined ECHO in its early days.
Just to take you back slightly, can you briefly tell me of your education history?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, like I said, I started my schooling here in Alex, and then moved over to the countryside. I finished my primary education there, went to high school, got a matric exemption, and went to jail, and only started my tertiary education when I was in jail through correspondence with UNISA. And upon my release, I then went full-time to Wits. I did a BA Law, LLB full-time, and then I did higher diploma in company law for 2 years part-time with Wits. And then I did my master's degree in tax with Rao, then now the University of Johannesburg, and I did a stream of other certificates subsequently. And I then got admitted as an attorney after I did my articles with the Alex Community Law Clinic. I practiced as an attorney, and then later got employed, and then later practiced as an advocate, left the practice, and then worked again.
Okay. Well, just also to tell me a bit about your family circumstances. Can you go back just to tell me a little bit about?
Okay.
Yeah.
Like I said, my mother and father divorced when I was young. I have two siblings, other siblings, my elder sister and my younger sister. I had a younger brother as well who committed suicide in 2006, and yeah, so I have remaining my two siblings, my elder sister who's a teacher and my younger sister who's a nurse.
Okay. Their names are?
My elder sister it's Nancy, and then my younger sister is Mamsi.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you still remember your residential history? Where you used to grow up?
Yes, like I said, I was born at number 128 8th Avenue. And then after some time we moved to 121 8th Avenue. And then I moved over to the countryside in Brits. And when I came back, upon matriculating, I lived in Tembisa, Ipata section for about 3 years. And I came back, I went to Soweto, I lived with my uncle in Diploof, and then moved to my other sister, my cousin sister in Meadowlands, and I came back to Alex. And when I came back to Alex, I lived number 67 11th Avenue, at 67 8th Avenue, and then moved over to the flats phase 2 extension, C14 phase 2 extension, and then bought a house in Brendan where I live.
You must have rotated around the country.
In fact, before I moved over to the countryside, we moved. No, as I was in the countryside when I came back for school holidays, and we lived in 4th Avenue, number 50, 2nd Avenue, number 58. Moved to 2nd Avenue, number 50, and then moved to 4 number 83.
Wow.
So I lived in a number of places here in Alex.
Okay. Can you tell me of your organizational background, the objectives of your organization by the time when you first started to join politics?
Okay, like I said, I started off by being a member of the study group where we read political literature, and then when I came back to Alex, I then was part of the Alexandra Youth Congress. It was a youth organization that was organizing and mobilizing youth to struggle against apartheid for the liberation of the country. That's how I got involved. So the purpose was to organize, mobilize the youth to struggle for freedom.
So when you joined AICO, was it AICO?
AICO.
AICO.
Yeah, Alexandra Youth Congress.
So when did you start this organization?
Around 1983.
Can you still remember where was it launched? What was it
launched at Velgerspruit, and like I said, it was launched at Velgerspruit. Like I said, its aim were amongst others to mobilize the youth to fight for the liberation of the blacks in South Africa in general and Africans in particular.
Okay. So amongst other people who were members of this structure, who were some of the people who were involved there?
Paul Mashatile was the president and is still the president, because since he was elected into that position, and then with the detentions, etc., we never went to a Congress where new leadership was elected, so he remains the president of the Youth Congress. There were also people like Ernestine Thabo, Aubrey Kitime, Koni Bapela, Jacob Mojali, Petzel Banda, yeah, amongst others.
So when you joined this organization, can you still remember where did you actually join it? Maybe an area or a place, and why did you join this organization?
The place, the AICO was headquartered at a place in 17th Avenue, number 2 17th Avenue. We used to call it the RC. So that's where we met, and that's where I joined the organization. And why I joined, because like I said, I was conscious of what was happening around us, the system of apartheid, and the quest was to struggle in order to rid our society of that evil system of apartheid and for the liberation of our country.
So did you have a constitution?
Yes, we had a constitution. We were a properly structured organization with a constitution, with structures in place. Yeah.
So you had also a membership card?
Yes, I had a membership card.
May you still remember your membership number?
Unfortunately not. I still have my membership card somewhere at home. I'm going to have to search for that. But
Okay. You were just telling me that you had a constitution, you were meeting around 17th Avenue, and how were your meetings called? How you used to mobilize each other coming to a meeting?
well, word of mouth. Then we did not have cell phones. Some of us didn't even have landline phones at home. So it was by word of mouth, and we had fixed days on which we met. So we knew that, say for instance, on Tuesday at 6 o'clock, we all converge there, we have a meeting, and if there are other meetings subsequently to be called, it would be decided there when are we meeting, the time, etc., etc.
So, on your agenda there, what were these issues that were pressing issues that you discussed?
I mean, how to grow the organization. Remember then it was an organization of few activists.
Yes.
So we would always map a strategy as to how we would organize, mobilize in order to swell our ranks, in order to have as many people involved as possible. And then also education, political education, where we would task people with the responsibility of preparing papers on this and that, and then we'll engage in political education amongst ourselves, educating one another politically.
Yeah. So who was the person who first happened to recruit you into this?
I was not recruited into the organization, like I said. The events of 1976 raised my consciousness, political consciousness. And then when I came back, upon matriculating, I joined that study group. And when I came back to Alex, I then got associated with AICO. On my own, nobody recruited me into the organization.
So these study groups, where were they held?
In Tembisa, but class section where I used to live.
So was it in a school or in a ground?
No, we would rotate it amongst ourselves. They'll come to my place, I will go to other members' place. Sometimes we'll go to the library because we would then have access to some literature they read and engage.
Okay. Was AICO affiliated to some of the other organizations?
Yes, there were a number of youth structures then. You had your Soweto Youth Congress, SWECO, Soulsville, Atteridgeville Youth Congress. We were cooperating, working together. And then ultimately we then affiliated to the United Democratic Front when it was formed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Comrade Benito, in these study groups, as you were rotating around. You earlier mentioned that you studied material of Das Kapital, Marxism material. Where did you get this material from?
Well, we had our own sources where we got this material. Remember, the great majority of these materials were banned. So we had a way of getting them and reading them. And then we had friends who were in tertiary institutions and had some of these material as prescribed material. People who were studying politics, sociology, etc., who would have access to these books from the tertiary institutions they were attending, and they will make copies for us, and then we will read that and then engage and then interrogate the material.
Okay. So the relationship of ACO then, just to go back there, and UDF and other political parties, which were these political parties that UDF was affiliated to, or that they had links with?
Of course, as ACO, we had links. We saw ourselves as linked to the ANC, which was then banned and in exile.
Okay.
Yes.
So how did you work your underground working close with ANC, UDF then?
Of course, using underground structures, we were able to get to communicate with the ANC. We will listen to RF Radio Freedom, and we would hear the president shouting instructions, and then we will act.
Okay.
Yes.
The leadership that was there by then, how was that? Was it gender balanced?
Unfortunately not. Actually, of those few activists who were involved in the Youth Congress, there were